Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the second episode of our new webinar series, the Cloud Pragmatist. This series is designed for cloud networking and security professionals. Now we all know the cloud is transforming business, but the cloud is also going through its own transformation and it's evolving rapidly all the time. Our goal in this series is to highlight networking and security trends to help you on your journey through the cloud. I'm your host for today. My name is Brian Ashley, and I'm the Vice President of Solutions Management and Marketing here at Aviatrix. Joining me today is Scott Rainovich, who is the founder and Chief Technology Analyst at Futurium. Futurium is a research and analysis community focused on next generation technologies. And Scott has 2 decades of experience as a publisher, an editor, and an independent technology analyst. Welcome to the Cloud Pragmatist, Scott. In today's episode, we'll focus on 3 topics around cloud network security. The first is on-prem versus cloud security. How are things different when we go to cloud? How do cloud native solutions compare to our traditional appliances from on-prem? And how does the threat landscape change when we suddenly introduce cloud? The second is, how do things change when we introduce multi-cloud into this equation? Is there a difference between single cloud security and multi-cloud security? And if there is, what are some new approaches we can take to solve multi-cloud security challenges? Last thing will be, we'll discuss some common cloud security mistakes. What are some of the most common missteps that we see when customers are making a push and trying to solve cloud security problems? We'll also be taking an audience poll, so please take a look at the questions and share your thoughts there. We'll review the results towards the end of the episode. As we're talking throughout this, definitely submit questions as well. We'll try to address as many as possible towards the end of the episode. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so for those of us who have deployed enterprise environments in cloud, we know that on-prem security is quite different from security in the cloud. The cloud is a different world with different network and security rules. If we don't understand how this new world works, we can pretty easily increase our threat exposure, as it's pretty easy to gain internet access in the cloud. The security tools and protocols that we're used to and worked in our on-prem environment, they're available to us, but they weren't built for this new world. They kind of become less effective in providing complete protection and security given the new behavior of cloud. Meanwhile, the cloud resources are so easy to spin up, the network and visibility and control become even more critical as we grow and expand. So Scott, I would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts about this new cloud world, and how do things like security threats and exposure differ from that of on-prem networks?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, well, as you detailed, there's a lot of new challenges in the cloud or the multi-cloud world. At Futurium, we do a lot of research with end users, and we gather, through surveys and interviews, we talk about their challenges and what they're trying to accomplish. And when we did a couple of surveys last year, security in multi-cloud networking, multi-cloud came up again and again as one of the big challenges. And specifically, I would say the interplay between networks and security in multi-cloud environments, because in the old world, in a traditional environment, you owned the network, you owned your data center, and you put firewalls around that, like the fortress model. And that's completely changed. The so-called perimeterless security paradigm is now with us. And it's actually multifaceted. It's not just perimeterless, but it's also multi-layer, right? Where you once had to patrol, say you're in that traditional environment, you had to patrol your network and make sure bad guys didn't have access to your network, and then you had to make sure bad guys didn't have access to your applications. Now in the cloud, there's all sorts of things. There's you're connecting to different sources of data in the cloud. You're connecting to different APIs. So there's concerns about API security. You might be running or accessing applications based on microservices. So there's the question of who accesses the microservices. There's even this new concept of data in, securing data in the memory processors in the cloud. So there's many different layers of security that need to be addressed in the cloud. And I would, to sum up, the general challenge is security professionals as well as networking professionals need a way to see and manage all this, in a more consolidated place. They're going to many different tools in many different places, networking tools, cloud tools, and it's somewhat chaotic. So they really need help consolidating the views, the management, and the visibility into all of these cloud security threats.
Got it. Yeah, and I think we see a lot of the same thing when we're talking to a lot of our customers. It's just, again, a different landscape that they're going into and having to deal with. But you touched on multi-cloud there, so let's jump into that a little bit. We're seeing more and more customers embrace multi-cloud in their environments, and sometimes this may be a result of sort of organic growth within the organization, and they're scaling to another cloud to run the service where it runs best. But a lot of times we see it forced by inorganic growth, where things like mergers and acquisitions or third-party integrations force multi-cloud adoption. So whether that application lives across multiple clouds or enterprises are simply supporting multiple applications in multiple clouds, the cloud architects are faced with trying to make this security and this increased things that they have to manage as uniform as possible in an effort to try to maximize, as you said, that visibility and control, all while maintaining and minimizing sort of the new tool set requirements and skills gaps and learning curves. So how do you see this problem change, Scott? I mean, what do you see as one of the major differences between security in a single cloud versus multi-cloud?
Yeah. Good question, Brian. I think the main driver here is people are looking at easy ways, nothing's easy, but better ways to integrate different infrastructures, as you pointed out, like say there's a merger. The good news is in the cloud and in networks, we have increasingly moved to a software-defined world, meaning infrastructure can be instantiated, managed, orchestrated with software, which is more agile. There's this so-called infrastructure as code movement. I'm sure you're familiar with Terraform, and many of the professionals on this listening to us today use Terraform, which is an automation tool, creating infrastructure as code. So in these environments where there's mergers or integrations, that will make things easier, right? Because instead of moving big blocks of hardware around and having people manually switch ports and do truck rolls and all that physical world stuff, a lot of that is mediated by software, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is getting some sort of integration between the network and security. I think in the past, that traditional world we talked about, where you had your Ethernet switches in the closet and you plugged into your routers, and then you installed a firewall and all the antivirus and all this. It was all kind of a separate process. I think we're increasingly moving to a world where because it's software driven, the networking infrastructure and the security can be unified and deployed as one piece of infrastructure. And then if you need to add security tools or APIs or gateways, you can do that with software using, kind of a streamlined infrastructure, if you will. I think that's the way the world is going. And I think that will help mitigate a lot of these challenges of, as you put it, kind of integrating or tying together these different clouds, whether you're doing it purposefully or whether your company just bought somebody and your boss tells you you have to do it tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah. Whether or not it gets forced on you. Yeah, totally agree. I think, you bring up an interesting point there too, about the network and security starting to merge together a little bit, which is interesting. I mean, we attempted to do this in the on-prem world by putting line cards into routers and switches to perform security services, and it didn't go so well. It was expensive. It often hurt our performance, and was really, really hard to manage and make sure we had uniform coverage. But to your point, with more of a software defined approach, that now sort of becomes unlocked again. We have more of these distributed systems that are out there. We as long as we understand the language, be it Terraform or API calls or whatever the case may be, we now have cloud instances that we can, in a distributed system that we can programmably interact with, and start to merge some of these things and bring some of those worlds together. I got one more question for you on this topic, because I think it's obviously a buzzword, and I think a lot of people are putting a lot of stock in this as a good approach. Can you talk a little bit about your take or view on zero trust in the cloud, single cloud, multi-cloud? Is that the way forward? Is that the panacea that everybody thinks that it's going to be to the answer to all their security problems?
Yes, absolutely. We run a couple of surveys and reports on zero trust. The first thing I'll say is zero trust. It's not like some magic bullet special technology that you go into Home Depot and buy your zero trust. It's a concept or a philosophy, and really the philosophy of zero trust is that you have to verify everything. You have to verify whether it's a person, a device, or an application, trying to connect. You have to verify them across several different, parameters. And the reason why there's a strong movement to zero trust is, like I said, we were in the so-called perimeter security paradigm, the fortress model, where there was a door, and it was either locked and people couldn't get in, or they could. The cloud is, I don't know what the analogy is of the doors, but there's, it's pretty much open, right? So you have to trust, you have to verify and secure things at kind of a micro level, either an application level or an identity level, or preferably all of these, so the idea of zero trust is you use specific identity authentication techniques, also application and analytics techniques. Is this application behaving the way this application should, or does it look suspicious? Does it look like a Russian bot is trying to invade our server? So it's kind of a multi-layered approach, but the concept of zero trust means you don't trust anything until you verify it across several vectors. And this is especially important because, like we said, that if you think about the cloud consists of many different connected applications, networks, services, data feeds, APIs. So you need a zero trust mindset to make sure that everything that is connecting or communicating in the cloud is being verified constantly.
Got it. Okay, great, fantastic. I had an interesting question come through the chat here, so I'll take a stab at it to give you a little bit of a break, and then we'll get your input. So the question that came through was how can we simplify the security measures from an a CXO standpoint? Which I think, obviously it's an interesting question because, depending upon their persona, they look at, these things in different ways, right? I mean, obviously the network practitioner or security practitioner is looking much lower level than I think, some of the execs and CXOs are. But at the end of the day, they're wanting the same outcome to make sure that their resources are protected and that their critical data and infrastructure is protected. Now, I think while, if we sort of bubble that up into compliance and audit and those kinds of things, that's where we start to diverge a little bit. That practitioner may be responsible for evidence gathering, and dealing directly with auditors to try to provide some of that explanation of how the governance and security posture is being carried out. But as we go further up into the executive world, it's still a little bit higher level in making sure that things are compliant and that we're meeting everything that we need. I think it's been an interesting, the CSPs talk about this a lot, this idea of security being a shared responsibility, right? The CSPs will take care of security of the cloud. It is your job to secure what's in the cloud. And while that, there are SLAs that are tied to that and all of that kind of thing, there's still this blanketed statement that sits out there, right? And really what happens is at the end of the day, organizations are responsible for the loss of customer trust or loss of customer data as a result of any kind of breach. The CSPs will compensate you in some form or fashion for the loss of those services, but it's up to the organization itself to make sure that their environment that they're using, their customers are leveraging, is secure. So I would say from, in terms of being able to simplify the security measures from an executive standpoint, obviously, a lot of what we've talked about today already in trying to find uniform ways, especially as you go multi-cloud, looking at things like zero trust, those are all good, solid ways that will help that executive feel more comfortable about what's going on in cloud. I think and we'll talk about this here kind of in the next section when we get into kind of the mistakes of that a lot of customers make. Is just a fundamental understanding that we're in that different world. What works for us in the on-prem world doesn't complete the story in cloud, right? It's part of it and it still brings value, but there's these new and different changes that have to happen. Our capabilities are a little bit different. And we have to understand that to be able to really complete the security story and posture inside a cloud. Scott, any comments on how we might be able to simplify things from an executive standpoint?
Yes. Oh, those pesky executives. Yeah. I think there's two things going on here. One is communication and engagement with the executives and particularly the board level. I'll talk about the technical issues second, but this can't be understated. If you look at a lot of the largest, there's been a lot of bad hacking breach headlines in the last 10 years, right? Huge amounts of data compromised, people losing personal data, and I would say the vast majority of those breaches were not due to the lack of technical tools to stop them. They were due to people not being willing to stop them, meaning the board of the company or this chief executive officer were not fully engaged with their security staff, with their security tools, and really watching the hen house, if you were. it was really, and that's, I mean, that's a strong personal opinion of mine. I think most things start with people, and that is one of the themes in our studies. We studied many different breaches of the past 10 years, and one of the most famous one is the Equifax breach, right, where millions of people's financial credit ratings were leaked. In that case, they found, they really were not on top of their security policies and not updating their approach. So now let me dive down to the technical layer. So the challenge at the executive and the board level is, oh, this is just going to cost a ton of money, right? That's the first concern. We're going to have to hire people. We're going to have to implement a lot of new tools, and that's the struggle, right? But really, the key technical trends that we have recently can help with that, because they're about integration and they're about automation. When we talk to CISOs, the number one thing that comes up is that we have to consolidate our tools and we have to automate, because the SOC, the people in the security operations centers are overwhelmed with alerts. They've got dozens of tools they're monitoring. So most of the CISOs we talk to are focused on that. How do we integrate these tools? Like we talked about, how do we integrate the network with security? How do we integrate so there's one place, maybe not one place, but less places to look, to monitor everything, get visibility of everything that's going on, look at alerts, and then how do we automate, to help these people? I think when you take that approach and then you communicate that to the executives of the boards of the companies, the light bulb might go off like, oh, we're gonna do this better, which doesn't necessarily mean we have to spend more money, but we're going to become more efficient. I think those are two key approaches.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about some of the common security mistakes that we see when people are migrating to a single cloud or even moving to multi-cloud. So I've got two, and Scott, I won't put you on the hook for what you see, but I do have a question. So what I see as some common mistakes are, one, just assuming that the way I did it in on-prem is going to be good enough in cloud. That same approach, the same tool sets, if I, most of those, as we said earlier, are available to us in some form or fashion in the cloud, and I can just kind of port them up there, do what I did. But I think, and Scott, you mentioned this before, that concept that we had on-prem of drawing a big moat around our infrastructure, just doesn't work in cloud anymore, right? I mean, everything is one hop away from the internet, and so that just doesn't really exist. But that kind of leads me to my second common mistake that I see, which is a realization of that, and then an over rotation on, okay, well, now we need all these tools to cover all these gaps. We need, there's some new cool stuff out there like XDR and, all these other tool sets. There's machine learning that potentially could help me out. I got to use some of the cloud native stuff as well. So, if I'm in AWS, I'm using some CloudGuard stuff. If I'm in Azure, I'm using Sentinel and Defender and NSGs and all this stuff. And then I pipe it all back. And as you rightly said, there are some poor individuals who have to sift through all of this mass of alerts and try to pick out the one or two that are legitimate. And so the result there is a real problem that exists right now of alert fatigue, of just way too much noise. And so, trying to get to that, as you were just talking about, that kind of Goldilocks zone of consolidation of tools with automation is, that nirvana. But even as we look at automation, oftentimes these security guys and networking guys, they're not coders, right? So even to get to anything automated becomes, more of a learning curve. So with that, Scott, I guess my question to you is, where can people look for assistance or guidance on moving, okay, I'm moving to cloud, or I'm going to multi-cloud. I hear about all of these problems. Where can they go for help?
Well, you want me to say Aviatrix, don't you, Brian? But that's assumed. But
yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll leave Aviatrix out of it. But
okay, yeah,
I
just one of many places to go.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not sure if there's like an 800 number you call, but no, I think the way to look at it is, joking aside, look, everybody has to work with their vendors, right? They have a lot of security tools that they use. Like we said, the average, the studies that we've done and the studies we've looked at says the average, Fortune 5 enterprise, has more than 50 security tools that they use. So, you're gonna work with your vendors, but you're gonna also ask them the important questions that we talked about. How are you going to solve this problem for me by integrating and working with other vendors? I think that's the number one thing that has to happen. And if you're talking to a vendor that is not let's see, playing the same game that we're talking about, and the game being, oh, how do you integrate cloud natively? How do you use API gateways? How do you implement a zero trust security posture? How do we integrate the network with the security to gain, single point of visibility across different cloud and hybrid clouds and API gateways? If they're not answering those questions, or they're just giving you a blank look, you have to move to a different vendor. I would say that's probably the biggest challenge right now, is that some of these some of the security tools are kind of locked in the old paradigm that we talked about, the traditional enterprise, the perimeter, whereas there's a new generation of tools that are based on cloud native technologies and APIs and multi-cloud environments. So I think you're obviously going to have to get help from your vendors, but they have to be talking the right story.
Got it.
Does that make sense, or did I evade the question?
No, totally. No, that works. That works. So, all right. So with that, I think I'm going to turn back here to the audience and just pick some questions. Let's see. So, all right. So here's a good one. Recently we had the world got hit by this Log4j issue that was out there, right? And I think we've sort of touched on this a little bit already. One of the promises of cloud, outside of endless compute and storage, is access to a lot of these advanced services like AI and ML, right? What part do you see AI and ML playing in the future of securing single and multi-cloud infrastructures?
This is a question for me, Brian.
We can both take it, but yeah, feel free to dive in first.
Well, I mean, AI it's a very broad technology. It's what I call horizontal technology. AI is applied to just about every application on Earth. I mean, the main strength of AI would be, automation. So going through some of these log files and correlating data and deciding when something is more likely to be a threat than not, for example, or analytics, like I said, of applications. How is this application behaving? Is it suspicious? If it's suspicious, then how do we mitigate the threat automatically without, having a human interact. I mean, that's where, let's face it, I was on a chat session this morning. I won't name, the company, but a customer support thing. And everybody, to me, that's like the ultimate paradigm of AI, right? Everybody's been on these automated chats. Like, some of them, I must say, have gotten quite good. Like, I'm a skeptic. I would say, like, a couple years ago, most of them were terrible.
Yeah.
But they've definitely improved. And I was on one this morning that was pretty amazing. Like, it actually guided me through an automated way to do everything, including clicking on a link on the website. And I didn't have to call anybody, and I actually was satisfied. So I think that's an example of how AI is going to help the security field automate some of the processing of these alerts, evaluating threats, telling you when you have a problem, like the predictive maintenance in your car or whatever. So that's the primary benefit.
Got it. Okay. From my take, I 100% agree with everything you said. I think the danger with AI and ML is it's very easy to think that it's just something I turn on and it instantly, just makes my life better in some form or fashion, right? And the reality is, when we look at ML, right, there's this aspect of learning that happens in ML, right? And in a simplified version, I use this all the time when talking to some other customers is, a common use of ML is like identifying a picture of a cat every time it sees it in a sea of pictures. The problem is your ML doesn't know what a cat is. So you have to teach it what a cat looks like first, which means you got to send it 10,000 pictures of a cat. And then your ML goes, okay, I know what a cat is now. And then you can feed it the 100,000 pictures of dogs and birds and chickens and fish, and it will pull out the cats because it's now learned that. So when we look at applying AI and ML to, help us in the security space, which I think long-term actually will do a great job just by nature of it. But we can't forget that there's also learning that's required there. You have to teach ML either what to look for or what not to before it can then be applied in the most appropriate way. So, it's not one of these services that you're going to be able to go and flip a switch and use. However, we may be able to get to a point where, some of that data, obfuscated, obviously, so we don't, we protect the innocent, can be shared. And my hope is that continues to make it easier to consume and protect critical resources in a very cloud-centric, intelligent way. Okay, so I think, I believe we've got the results of the poll that we could probably pull up here. So thank you guys for taking a look at this and answering. So it's interesting that, so obviously the question was, what are some of the biggest security challenges that customers face? And surprise, surprise, Scott, I know you're shocked by this. Skill set, lack of skills is the #1 answer, coming in at almost 50%. And so I say that sarcastically, obviously, because skills gap is plaguing our industry right now, not only in security, in networking, but kind of in all of cloud. And second on this list is a lack of visibility and control. And so I think the skills gap. Scott, I'd be interested in your take. I think obviously a lot of automation, which in one sense is yet another skills gap that that people have to learn how to do these things, but once successfully implemented, can help address some of that in abstracting away some of those cloud complexities. But what's your take on kind of the visibility and monitoring? Where do you see that, and how do you see us potentially in the industry potentially trying to address that?
Oh, 100%, 100%. I mean, if you can't see something, how do you know what's happening? It's kind of like the what's the first thing that people do when they want to improve security? Well, they add security cameras, right? Because they want to see, what's happening, right? So yeah, I mean, this is again an area where I think Aviatrix, as well as other vendors, are helping a lot by the concept of the network and security should be one, right? That's where all the data is moving. That's where all the activity is. So we should be examining that activity and monitoring it, and then analyzing it, and like we said, running it through AI algorithms or something to make sure everything's right. And that's going to be the future. The future is having better monitoring and analytics tools to help automate, the network and the security.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, I think we're very, in one hand, we're at the very beginning of thorough cloud adoption by large scale enterprises. I mean, everyone's kind of getting started, they're on the journey, but most of the customers that we talk to are, they've got 10%, 20% of workloads, right? And are continue to making that big shift. So it's on the one hand, it's good. We're still early. We can still figure some of these things out and start to get some guidance and education to address some of the skills gap issues, get more consistency in how we try to approach, whether it's our overall strategy and looking at things like zero trust, or leveraging additional tool sets that prepare us better for multi-cloud. On the other, we've got a long way to go with this whole cloud thing. And so the danger is in not, taking that seriously or putting the pieces in place to try to solve this. You just see the chance of risk go up and up and up and up and up as organizations move more and more into the cloud, and their threat exposure scales. And so, don't say that to scare anybody, just to kind of lay it out there, that, it's both opportunity and risk all at the same time. So, well, listen, I think that's about all the time we have for today. So Scott, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise with us. To the folks who were on, if you found this conversation valuable, please keep an eye out for an email about our next episode of the Cloud Pragmatist. We'll be discussing career advice for networking engineers and architects who want to move into the cloud, or those already working in the cloud who want to further their careers. And just a big thank you to the entire audience for your attention today. All of the excellent questions that have come in, those have been great. Apologies if we weren't able to get to all of them live, but I know we've got some folks in the chat who are asking. If you're looking to learn more about Aviatrix, we have a couple of pieces of content on the screen right here. We also offer something that we refer to as ACE, which is our multi-cloud networking certification. It's got courses ranging from sort of beginner to expert. We have self-paced options and instructor-led options. And the great thing about some of the beginning courses within our ACE program is we teach a lot about Cloud 101 with a little bit of Aviatrix. So even for those who may just be new to cloud and trying to learn some of the basics, it's a great place to start. With that, thank you guys so much for your time and attention, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everybody.